The desert of HFY 7 stretched beneath a sky bruised purple and gold, where twin suns baked the dunes into glassy ridges that shimmered like frozen waves of molten amber. The air tasted of iron and ozone, and the wind carried the whisper of ancient sandstorms that had scoured this world for millennia. Here, on the blood-salt flats, the last battle of the Vrixian Succession War had been fought, not with fleets or plasma cannons, but with honor, sweat, and the unspoken code of the skyborn queens. And here, amidst the shattered remains of armored skimmers and the half-buried bones of war beasts, a human man named Torin Vel knelt, bleeding from 3 wounds, his armor cracked open like an eggshell, his breath ragged as a dying bellows. He clutched a single, crumpled sheet of paper in his trembling hand. Not a weapon, not a treaty, but a letter. A letter he had written 3 nights before, beneath the flickering glow of a dying battery lamp, in a language no Vrixian was meant to read, penned with ink made from crushed beetle carapaces and his own hope. He had meant to burn it. He had meant to forget it. But he hadn't. Torin was not a soldier by birth. He was an exobiologist from a quiet Earth colony called Lasara 4, drafted into the Interstellar Accord's diplomatic corps after his research on Vrixian neural harmonics made him the only human who could speak their emotional resonance tongue, the song sense. He hadn't wanted to be here. He hadn't wanted to fight. But when the Queen of the Skyborn, Zanara the Unbroken, had been poisoned by her own sister, and the throne had been claimed by the ruthless warlord Caerwesis the Hollow, Torin had been the only one who could reach the last surviving heir. Princess Lyra, daughter of the fallen queen, hiding in the Whispering Dunes with a handful of loyalists. He'd been sent to negotiate. He'd ended up staying. Not because he believed in war, but because he'd seen her. Lyra was not like the tales told in human propaganda. She did not roar like a beast or crush enemies beneath her heel. She moved like wind over water, silent, fluid, impossible to grasp. Her skin was the deep blue of a midnight ocean under a full moon. Her hair a cascade of shimmering cerulean strands that floated as if suspended in 0G, even here in the heavy gravity of HFY 7. Her eyes held galaxies, swirling, shifting, alive with emotions too complex for human words. She spoke in song sense, which Torin had learned not through machines, but through listening, through sitting with her for hours under the twin stars, watching her trace patterns in the sand with her fingers, humming low notes that made the dust dance. He had never loved anyone before. He had never believed love could exist between species, between worlds, between a man who feared silence and a woman who spoke in symphonies. But he had fallen, and in his quietest, most foolish moments, he had written her a letter. He didn't know she had found it. He didn't know she had read it. He didn't know she had kept it. Now, as the last of the Hollow's war beasts collapsed in a shower of sparks and steam behind him, and the distant echo of Vrixian war drums faded into the wind, Torin lay half dead, the letter pressed against his chest like a prayer. His vision blurred. The suns burned hot. His fingers, stiff with blood and sand, could barely hold the paper. He thought he was dying. He thought no one would ever know how he had felt. He thought he had failed. Then, a shadow fell over him. Not the shadow of a warrior. Not the shadow of a conqueror. But something softer. Something that smelled like rain on hot stone and jasmine grown in 0G greenhouses. Lyra knelt beside him. She wore no armor. Only a flowing robe of woven moon silk, dyed the color of twilight, stitched with threads that glowed faintly as she moved. Her hair, long and wild, curled around her shoulders like liquid sapphire. Her face was streaked with ash and sweat, but her eyes, oh her eyes, were bright with something Torin had never seen before. Not anger, not grief, not triumph, amusement, and something deeper, something warm. She reached down, not for a weapon, not for a medkit, but for the letter. Her fingers, long and tipped with faintly luminous nails, brushed his. He flinched not from pain, but from the electric warmth of her touch. She pulled the paper free. Torin tried to speak, tried to beg her not to read it, tried to say he was sorry, that it was nonsense, that he was just a fool who didn't belong here. But his voice was gone, so he watched. She unfolded the letter slowly, as if handling something sacred. The paper was stained with sweat and dried blood, the ink slightly smudged, the handwriting messy, earnest, clumsy, like a child learning to write his own name. She read. The desert held its breath. The wind stilled. Even the sand seemed to pause, as if afraid to disturb the silence. And then, as the last line passed beneath her gaze, Lyra looked up. Her lips curled, not into a smile, not into a smirk, into something far more dangerous, something that made Torin's heart stop. She smiled, and then she said, her voice a melody woven from starlight and thunder, "So you like my body, human?" Torin's eyes widened. His mouth opened. No sound came out. He felt his face burn hotter than the twin suns. He had written, in that letter, things he had never dared say aloud. He had written about the way her hair moved when she laughed, how it seemed to ripple like underwater kelp in a current only she could feel. He had written about the curve of her shoulder when she leaned over the sand table, tracing orbital paths with her fingertip, how the light caught the faint bioluminescent freckles along her collarbone. He had written about how her voice, when she sang in song sense, made his bones hum. He had written, in the most honest, foolish, terrifying way he knew how, "I think I love you, not because you're powerful, not because you're beautiful, but because when you're near, I forget how to be afraid." And now she knew, and now she was smiling, and now she was holding his most private thought like a flower plucked from a grave. He wanted to die. He wanted to live. He wanted to crawl into the sand and never come out. Lyra folded the letter with careful, deliberate fingers, as if sealing a vow. Then, without a word, she tucked it into the inner pocket of her robe, right over her heart. She reached for his hand. Her touch was cool, soothing, alive. "You wrote that," she said, her voice low, musical, teasing, "because you were afraid I wouldn't know." Torin swallowed. I was afraid you'd laugh." "I did," she said, and her smile deepened, revealing the faintest glimmer of pearlescent teeth. "But not because it was silly." She leaned closer. Her breath smelled of crushed moon blossoms and something wild, something ancient. "Because it was true." He couldn't breathe. She pressed her forehead gently to his. The song sense flared between them, not as words, not as sounds, but as feeling. A wave of warmth, of recognition, of something ancient and quiet and beautiful, like the first pulse of life in a newborn star. He felt her joy. He felt her fear. He felt her longing. And for the first time since he had stepped onto this cursed, beautiful world, Torin Vel didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like he belonged. Lyra stood. She extended her hand. "Get up, human," she said, her voice now firm, edged with the steel of a queen reclaiming her throne. "We have a war to finish." The battle had not ended. It had only paused. Krys the Hollow, the usurper, had fled into the obsidian spire, a towering monolith of black crystal that pulsed with stolen energy, built atop the ancient tomb of the first skyborn queen. It was said that within its heart lay the crown of echoes, a relic that could amplify song sense to devastating levels. Whoever wore it could bend the emotions of entire armies, turning fear into rage, love into despair, hope into silence. Krys had already begun the ritual. He had drained 3 of Lyra's closest advisors, their bodies found hollowed out, their eyes turned to glass, their song sense ripped from them like threads from a tapestry. He planned to use the crown to break the last of the loyalist resistance, and then to force Lyra to kneel before him, not as a princess, but as a broken thing, her emotions stripped bare, her will shattered. Lyra had planned to storm the spire alone. Torin had tried to stop her. "You'll die," he had said, gripping her wrist as she strapped on her last remaining pulse blade. "I already have," she replied, her eyes distant. "The moment I let you write that letter, I became vulnerable, and Krys will use that." "I'll come with you," he said. "You can't fight like we do." "I don't need to fight like you do," he said. "I just need to be there." She had looked at him then, really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. Not as a human, not as a tool, not as a curiosity, but as a man. And she had nodded. So now, as the suns dipped low, painting the desert in molten crimson and violet, they stood at the base of the obsidian spire. The air around it hummed. The sand crackled with static. The sky above churned with unnatural clouds, swirling, screaming, alive. Inside, Krys was chanting. The crown was glowing. And Lyra's people, dozens of them, wounded, weary, but unbroken, waited at the entrance, their song sense flickering like dying candles. Torin carried no weapon. He carried only the memory of her smile, and the words he had written. Lyra turned to him. "Are you afraid?" she asked. He thought of the letter. He thought of her reading it. He thought of her holding it to her heart. "No," he said. She tilted her head. "Liar." He grinned. A crooked, lopsided human thing. "I'm terrified," he admitted. But I'm more terrified of losing you than I am of dying. She stared at him. For a long moment the world held its breath. Then she laughed. Not the soft, musical laugh he had grown to love, but a deep, ringing, glorious sound that echoed off the spire's walls and sent a ripple of warmth through the entire desert. You are the strangest creature I have ever met, she said, stepping forward and pressing her forehead to his again. This time, the song sense surged between them, not just emotion but memory. She showed him her childhood, running barefoot through the crystal forests, her mother's voice singing lullabies that made the trees bloom. She showed him the night she found the letter, hidden beneath his cot, tucked inside a cracked datapad he thought was broken. She showed him how she had read it 3 times, how she had cried, how she had kissed the paper, how she had whispered, "I love you too," into the dark. And then, without another word, she took his hand, and they walked into the spire. The interior was a nightmare of living crystal. Walls pulsed like veins. Floors shimmered with trapped echoes of the dead. The air tasted of copper and sorrow. And at the center, standing atop a dais of fused bone and black glass, was HFY. He was tall, towering even for a Vrixian, but twisted. His skin was cracked and gray, veins of sickly violet light crawling beneath the surface like worms. His hair, once a proud silver, had withered into brittle threads. His eyes were hollow pits, glowing with stolen song scents. Before him, suspended in a cage of crackling energy, hovered the crown of echoes, a circlet of woven shadow and starlight, pulsing with the screams of the dead. HFY turned. His lips split into a grin that revealed too many teeth. "Princess," he hissed, his voice a chorus of 100 broken voices. "You came, and you brought the human." Torin felt Lyra's grip tighten. He didn't flinch. He stepped forward. "Yeah," he said, his voice steady, clear, human. "I did." HFY laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "You think your pathetic little emotions matter? You think your fragile human heart can stand against the power of the crown? You think she loves you? She pities you. She uses you." Torin didn't answer. He just looked at Lyra, and she looked back. And in that moment, without words, without song sense, without any technology at all, she smiled. And Torin knew. He knew with every fiber of his being that HFY was wrong. HFY raised his arms. The crown roared. A wave of pure despair slammed into the chamber. The loyalists screamed. Some collapsed. Some wept. Some clawed at their own faces, begging for death. Lyra staggered. Her skin dimmed. Her hair lost its glow. Her eyes dulled. She fell to one knee. Torin's heart shattered. He wanted to run. He wanted to scream. He wanted to die for her. But instead, he did the only thing he knew how to do. He began to sing. Not a song of war. Not a song of power. But a song he had learned from her. A lullaby. The one she sang when she thought no one was listening. He didn't know the words. He didn't know the notes. But he remembered the feeling. And he sang it. With his voice, cracked and trembling. With his soul raw and aching. He sang the way she sang when the twin suns set. He sang the way she sang when she first saw Earth's oceans on a holoscreen. He sang the way she sang when she touched his hand for the first time. He sang her love. He sang his love. And the spire listened. The crystal walls trembled. The energy cage flickered. HFY's grin faltered. What are you doing?" he hissed. Torin kept singing. Lyra lifted her head. Her eyes, dull moments before, began to glow. Not with rage. Not with power. But with memory. With joy. With love. She stood. Slowly. Gracefully. Her hair flared back to life. A cascade of cerulean fire. Her skin shimmered with bioluminescent runes. Ancient symbols of the skyborn queens, glowing brighter than ever. She stepped forward. And she sang back. Not with her voice, but with her soul. Her song sense surged not as a weapon, but as an answer. The crown screamed. The energy cage shattered. HFY staggered back, clutching his head, his stolen power unraveling like thread pulled from a rotten tapestry. You cannot. You are just a human." Torin kept singing. Lyra stepped into the center of the chamber. She reached out not for the crown, but for Torin. And when her fingers touched his, the crown didn't attack. Listened. And then, impossibly gently, it floated down, landed softly in Torin's open palm. He stared at it. It was cold. It was beautiful. It was alive. And it hummed. Not with pain. not with rage, but with peace. Lyra knelt before him. She took his hand, and she placed the crown upon his head. Torin gasped. The world exploded with color. He heard every heartbeat of every living thing in the spire. He felt the grief of the dead, the joy of the living, the love of Lyra. So vast, so deep, so bright it burned like a supernova. And then, gently, the crown shifted. It reshaped. It softened. It became something else. A circlet of woven light, shaped like two intertwined vines. One side glowed with the blue of Lyra's skin, the other the warm gold of human warmth. It settled on Torin's brow, and the spire fell silent, not in defeat, in reverence. KRYSS screamed. He lunged, but Lyra moved faster. One hand caught his wrist, the other pressed to his chest, and she sang, not a song of vengeance, but a song of release, a song of forgiveness. The violet veins in KRYSS's skin dimmed. His hollow eyes filled with tears. His scream became a sob. And then, slowly, he collapsed. Not dead, not broken, but free. The crown's power had not destroyed him. It had healed him. The last of the stolen song scents flowed back into the world, returning to its rightful owners. The loyalists rose. The walls of the spire glowed softly, as if breathing. And the crown, now called the Crown of Two Hearts, rested upon Torin's brow. Lyra stood. She looked at him, and she smiled. Not the teasing, joyful smile from before, but the smile of a queen who had found her king. She reached up, and gently, tenderly, she pulled the crown from his head. Then she placed it upon her own, and she knelt before him, not as a princess, not as a queen, but as a woman. And she said, in perfect, clear, simple human language, because she had learned it from his letters, from his laughter, from his terrible jokes about Earth's coffee. Torin Vel, will you marry me? The desert outside sighed. The twin suns dipped below the horizon, and the stars, for the first time in centuries, began to sing. Torin looked down at her blue skin, at her glowing hair, at her eyes, full of galaxies and grace. He thought of the letter. He thought of the desert. He thought of the crown. He thought of how he had never once imagined this. And yet, it was the only thing he had ever wanted. He smiled, and he said, only if you promise to let me write another letter. She laughed, and then she kissed him, and the entire desert, every grain of sand, every whispering dune, every forgotten star, echoed with the sound of a love that had defied worlds. They did not leave the spire that night. They stayed. They sat on the steps, wrapped in each other's arms, as the stars blazed above. Lyra told him stories of her ancestors, the skyborn queens who had once ruled not with force, but with harmony. Torin told her about Earth, about rain that fell in sheets, about dogs that barked at clouds, about a man named Bob who once tried to microwave a burrito for 3 hours and set his apartment on fire. She laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks. He laughed until his ribs hurt. And when the moon rose, large, silver, and impossibly beautiful, they lay back on the warm crystal steps, side by side, watching the sky. You know, Lyra murmured, her head resting on his chest, I never thought I would fall in love with a human. Neither did I, Torin said. I thought aliens were supposed to be scary, or cold, or, not you. She nudged him with her elbow. You wrote that I had the body of a storm made beautiful. You said that. He groaned. Oh gods, you read that part too. I read all of it, she said, turning to face him. Every word. Even the one where you said you thought my hair looked like 1,000 electric jellyfish having a party. He buried his face in his hands. I'm never writing another letter. She kissed his forehead. Good, because I already have your next one planned. He peeked through his fingers. What? She smiled, slowly, sweetly, and with the quiet certainty of a woman who had found her home. I'm going to marry you, she said, and we're going to have children, 100 of them, maybe more. Half will have blue skin, half will have freckles. All of them will be loud. All of them will be loved. And every single one of them will get to hear the story of how their father wrote a letter to their mother, and how she fell in love with him for it. Torin stared at her, and then slowly he reached out. He took her hand, and he whispered, I love you. She squeezed his fingers, and whispered back, I know. And for the first time in his life, he believed it. The stars above them blinked, one by one, as if in approval. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the desert, the first new moon blossoms began to bloom, green, blue, and glowing with the quiet, radiant light of a love that had crossed the void. Not with weapons, not with power, but with courage, with honesty, and with the simple, terrifying, beautiful act of writing down the truth. And they lived, not because they were heroes, but because they were brave enough to be human. And in that, they became more than either of them ever dreamed. The peace after the spire's fall was fragile, like a soap bubble catching the light, beautiful, shimmering, but never meant to last. Torin and Lyra returned to the skyborn capital, HFY, a city built into the cliffs of the Glass Canyon, its towers grown from living crystal that sang in the wind. They were hailed as saviors. The crown of two hearts, now a symbol of unity, pulsed softly whenever the two stood near each other. Their betrothal was declared official, the first human-Vrixian union in recorded history. Plans for the wedding swept through the streets like desert winds. Fabrics dyed in twin-sun hues, feasts prepared from bioluminescent fruits, songs composed that blended earth folk melodies with Vrixian song scents. For weeks, everything felt like a dream bathed in starlight. But dreams, Torin learned, often hide nightmares in their folds. It began with the silence, not the quiet of contemplation, but the eerie, hollow silence of disconnection. Lyra, once so open with her emotions, grew distant. She stopped humming in the mornings. She avoided touching his hand in public. She slept curled on the far edge of the bed they shared in the Queen's Spire, the room once belonging to her mother, now draped in fabrics woven with their names entwined. When Torin asked what was wrong, she would smile that practiced, regal smile and say, "The throne demands balance. We must be careful." Then came the dreams, Torin's dreams. Visions of Lyra standing on a dune beneath a blood-red moon. Her blue skin turned gray, her hair limp and dull, whispering in a voice that wasn't hers. "He is not one of us. He will break what we have built." He dismissed them at first. Stress, he thought, the aftereffects of the crown's power. But then the whispers started in the city. Not from enemies, but from her own inner circle. Elders in the Song Council spoke in hushed tones about purity of lineage, about how the skyborn bloodline must not be diluted by off-world flesh. One night, Torin overheard a guard mutter, "She'll have to choose, the throne or the human." He confronted Lyra. She didn't deny it. "I'm trying to protect you," she said, her voice strained. "The council is pressuring me to annul the union. They say the crown's bond was a trick, a side effect of the Hollow's corruption. They want me to marry Kalon, the high chieftain of the Dune Riders." Torin's heart stopped. "Kalon," he said, "the one who led the charge at the Bloodsalt Flats? The same. And you're considering it?" "No," she snapped, then softened. "Never. But if I refuse outright, they'll declare me unstable, unfit to rule. And without me, the peace collapses. KRYSS's loyalists are still out there. The spire is quiet, but the fractures remain." Torin wanted to rage, to shout, to demand she fight for them. But he saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of a crown heavier than any metal. So he did the hardest thing he'd ever done. He stepped back. "Then do what you must," he said quietly. "I won't stand between you and your people." She stared at him, her eyes wide with pain. "Torin, I love you," he interrupted. "More than I love myself. More than I love Earth or science or my own name. So if letting you go keeps your world from burning, then it's worth it." He turned and walked away, not in anger, in love. He left HFY that night, not as a fugitive but as a ghost. He took nothing but the clothes on his back and the datapad with his old letters, now blank, wiped clean by a grief too heavy to reread. He wandered the Glass Canyon for days, sleeping in caves, drinking from dew traps, talking to no one. The desert, once a battlefield, now felt like a tomb. But fate, it seemed, wasn't done with him. On the 7th night, a sandstorm rolled in, not natural but engineered. Torin felt the unnatural pulse in the air before he saw it. A swirling vortex of violet lightning, humming with residual crown energy. From its heart emerged a figure, hooded, cloaked in black, moving with unnatural grace. It was KRYSS, not healed, not redeemed, but reborn. His skin was now smooth, his eyes clear, but glowing with a cold, calculating intelligence that hadn't been there before. The crown hadn't healed him, Torin realized with horror. It had awakened something else in him, a fragment of the first skyborn queen, long-thought myth, buried in the spire's core. KRYSS had become a vessel, You left her, HFY said. His voice no longer a chorus, but a single, silky tone. A wise choice. She was never yours to keep. Torin's fists clenched. What do you want? The crown, HFY said. The true crown. The one you defiled with human sentiment. The crown of echoes was never meant to be shared. It was meant to rule. And I intend to reclaim it. You'll have to go through me, HFY laughed. I already have. He raised a hand. Torin's body froze, not from paralysis, but from memory. Because in HFY's grip was Lyra. Not as a prisoner, but as a bride. She stood beside him in a gown of obsidian thread, her hair bound in silver coils, her face expressionless. The crown of 2 hearts was gone from her brow. In its place sat a circlet of black crystal, older, sharper, humming with suppressed rage. Lyra, Torin whispered. She didn't look at him. She made her choice, HFY said. The council approved. The union unites the last factions. Stability returns. And you? You were a phase, a human whim. Torin's world shattered. But then, something flickered in Lyra's eyes. A blink, a tremor in her fingers, a memory, and Torin remembered the letter. The one she had kept, the one she had kissed. She hadn't betrayed him. She was playing a part, a deadly game. HFY turned to leave. The wedding is at midnight, on the eclipse dune. You're not invited. They vanished into the storm. Torin fell to his knees, but he didn't weep. He planned. He had no army, no weapons, no song sense mastery, but he had something HFY didn't expect. Hope, and a human mind trained to solve problems. He sought out the only allies he had left, the war-orphan children of HFY, the ones he taught earth songs to during his first moon there. They adored him. They called him Uncle Torin. Among them was a sharp-eyed girl named Scylla, who could hack the city's resonance network with a tuning fork and a strand of her own hair. You're mad, she said when he explained his plan. He'll crush you. He already thinks I'm crushed, Torin said. That's my advantage. With Scylla's help, he reactivated an old Accord distress beacon, disguised as a meteorological anomaly. It would draw the interstellar Accord fleet within 48 hours, not to invade but to observe. A show of off-world presence that would make HFY hesitate. Then he found the whispering drones, ancient Vrixian devices buried beneath the eclipse dune, used in coronation rites to amplify emotion. He reprogrammed them using song sense fragments from Lyra's old lullabies, songs only he knew, because she'd hummed them while writing beside him. Finally, he returned to the place where it all began, the blood-salt flats. He dug beneath the wreckage of his old skimmer, and found what he'd hidden there days before he left HFY. A second letter. This one never meant to be read. But now it would be his weapon. Midnight came. The eclipse dune glowed under the shadow of VRYX-7's moon, which swallowed one sun while the other burned low, casting the world in blood and shadow. Thousands gathered, Vrixian nobles, warriors, elders, all draped in ceremonial veils. At the dune's peak, HFY stood, the obsidian crown pulsing like a black heart. Lyra knelt before him, head bowed, hands bound in silver cords that muted her song sense. Torin stepped from the sands, alone, unarmed, wearing only his old field jacket, patched with Lyra's moon silk. Gasps rippled through the crowd. HFY smirked. The human returns. Come to watch your queen become a goddess. She's not your queen, Torin said, his voice ringing across the dune. And you're not a god. You're a thief who stole a story he doesn't understand. He held up a single sheet of paper. My second letter. Lyra's head lifted. Her eyes locked onto his. HFY laughed. You think words can stop me? No, Torin said. But love can. He began to read. Not the words, but the emotion behind them, channeled through the reprogrammed whispering drones, amplified by the eclipse, resonating with the very earth. He read about the night she cried when he burned his hand cooking earth noodles. He read about how she once danced alone in the rain during a rare Vrixian monsoon, her hair glowing like underwater fire. He read about how she whispered his name in her sleep. And as he spoke, the drones hummed. The sands trembled. Lyra's silver cords cracked. Her song sense rushed back, not as a weapon, but as a flood of truth. She rose, turned, and faced HFY. You used me, she said, her voice now thunder. But you never understood us. The obsidian crown flared, but the crown of 2 hearts, hidden beneath her robes, answered. Light erupted. Not white, not black, but gold and blue woven together. HFY screamed as the two energies clashed within him. The ancient queen's fragment recoiled, repelled not by power, but by something it couldn't comprehend. Mutual love, freely given. Torin ran to Lyra. She grabbed his hand. Together they sang. Not a battle cry, but their lullaby. The one he'd sung in the spire. The one she'd sung back. The crown of two hearts rose from her robes, spinning in the air, absorbing the obsidian crown's energy. Not destroying it, but transforming it. Turning domination into harmony. Fear into trust. Isolation into unity. HFY collapsed, not dead, but empty. His borrowed power gone, his mind his own again, small and trembling. The crowd fell to their knees not in fear, in awe. Weeks later, the wedding happened as planned, but not the one HFY had arranged. This one was held under open stars, on the newly blooming Moonblossom Plateau, where the first hybrid flowers, blue petals with golden centers, had sprouted from the ashes of war. Torin wore a tunic woven with threads of earth cotton and Vrixian moon silk. Lyra wore a gown that shifted color with her emotions. Now a deep, radiant cerulean shot through with gold. They exchanged vows in both languages. She promised to teach him the songs of her ancestors. He promised to tell their children about Earth's oceans, even if they never saw them. And when the crown of two hearts settled upon them both, sharing its light, its power, its love, the entire planet seemed to sigh in relief. But the greatest twist came 9 months later. Not with war, not with betrayal, but with life. Lyra gave birth not to one child, but to twins. A daughter, with skin the color of twilight and eyes that glowed like twin stars, named Seelan. And a son, with human freckles across his nose and hair that shimmered between brown and blue, named Joran. They cried in harmony from the moment they were born. And Torin, holding them both, looked at Lyra across the nursery made of singing crystal, and whispered, "We did it." She smiled. The same smile she'd given him in the desert, all those moons ago. "So you like my body, human?" she teased. He laughed, tears in his eyes. "I like everything about you," he said, "especially the part that chose me." And as the twins reached for each other's hands, their tiny fingers brushing, a new kind of song sense bloomed between them. Neither human nor Vrixian, but something entirely new, something beautiful, something that promised that the greatest adventures were not behind them, but ahead. The twins' first laugh echoed through the crystal nursery, a sound that made the walls hum and the moon blossoms bloom brighter. Lyra pressed her forehead to Torin's, her blue skin glowing softly in the twilight light. "We didn't just save a world," she whispered. "We built a new one." He kissed her, slow, tender, full of all the words he'd ever written and all the ones he never could. Outside, the twin suns dipped low, painting the desert in gold and blue, as if the sky itself was bowing. The crown of two hearts rested on their bedside, pulsing gently, no longer a relic, but a lullaby made solid. Their children slept, one with starlight in her eyes, the other with Earth's freckles on his cheeks. Their tiny hands clasped like roots grown together. No war came, no empire fell. Only love, quiet and fierce, blooming where once there was only sand and silence. And so, under the endless stars of HFY 7, they lived not as hero and queen, but as husband and wife, mother and father, and the first of many who would learn that home isn't a place. It's a choice you make every day.